a few comments on my last video asking about a dealer version of the 4473 walkthrough. So that's what this is. If you're not a dealer, this part doesn't really apply to you, but it's still good information to know because you can see if the dealer is doing what they're supposed to be doing when it comes to your paperwork and kind of protecting your information, what they ask for, why they ask for it, and what they need to make sure that you're able to buy a gun. So the form is really broken down into 5 sections, and they're lettered A through E. Section B is the only part that a customer deals with. Everything else is for the dealer. So Section A is the first part of the form that is supposed to be filled out by the dealer. And if that information is not there, technically they're not supposed to allow you to start filling out your part of the form. And that Section A is the firearms information. So what guns is the customer buying, and the model, the caliber, serial number, all of the pertinent information for that firearm, including how many firearms. And so it's important to have that all filled out. And if you're handed a paper copy, it's really easy to see that. If you're doing it digital, you can ask them if you can see that part before you fill out your part, but it's usually not necessary on the digital side because it won't let the customer fill out their part unless a gun is attached to it. But you still want to make sure it's the right gun attached to your transaction. So once that part's done, the next responsibility of the dealer is to verify what the customer has put in Section B. And to do that, we jump to Section C. And in Section C, it starts out with number 24, which is the category of the firearm to be transferred. So it breaks it down into 3 categories. It's pretty easy: a handgun, a long gun, or other. There are some weird parts with other. There's things like pistol grip firearms, the shockwave, things that don't fit into a long gun or a handgun, and they're just kind of an odd firearm type. Probably the most common other type is going to be like a pistol frame that's not a complete firearm, or a AR receiver that's not a complete firearm. So that would be under other. Number 25. If you're at a gun show or other qualifying event, and that's important to know, you can't just go sell guns wherever as a dealer. It has to be a qualifying event. And honestly, there's not really much guidance out there about that. The big thing is make sure that it's a reputable event that you're going to. Don't go to some flea market or something like that. That's not gonna check the boxes for the ATF. Make sure that it is a large or just even organized gun show targeted event that will pass the sniff test. If you're going to swap meets and selling guns, you're gonna get hung up in an issue. You're gonna get in trouble, especially when you get audited. If you're just doing sales out of your home or out of your licensed premises, 25 doesn't apply to you. But if you are doing sales at a third-party location that qualifies under this, you have to name the function. So, like I do premier gun shows and high caliber gun shows throughout Texas. So the name of the function is usually like high caliber gun and knife show. And then the county, address, city, state, and zip code of that particular show on that particular weekend. All that information needs to go in there. And then 26A and 26B, that is the bread and butter as a dealer. That is the government documentation that you need from the customer to verify everything that they filled out in Section B. Now, the important thing here is the documentation that they provide you has to be valid, and it has to check all of the pertinent boxes. And if you jump to the instructions for 26A, that's probably the easiest part to find all those boxes. So 26A for identification Before a licensee may sell or deliver a firearm to a non-licensee, so a customer, somebody that does not have their FFL, the licensee must establish the identity, the place of residence, age of the transferee and buyer. And to do that, the transferee and buyer must provide a valid government-issued photo identification that contains the transferee or buyer's name, residence, address, and date of birth. A driver's license or an identification card issued by a state is acceptable. Social security cards are not acceptable because no address, date of birth, or photograph is shown on the cards. It goes to further state that identification documents such as a driver's license or identification card are issued with binary, non-binary, or no sex designation may be used as an identification document, and then also that a combination of government-issued documents may be provided. So, and that's where 26B comes into place. There's also a caveat on there for members of our military that are on permanent orders. So they have to be permanent change of station orders. Temporary duty orders don't apply. So I'll get into that just a little bit later. So let's go to supplemental documentation. Licensees may accept a combination of valid government-issued documents to satisfy the identification document requirements of the law. The required valid government-issued photo identification documents, bearing the name, photograph, date of birth, may be supplemented by another valid government-issued document showing the transferee's residence address. And you have to record that in 26B. So what that means in simple terms is as long as they've got a photo ID, even if it doesn't have their address on it, but you know that that's them, that's their name, it's got their date of birth, and you have no doubt that that is that person that they're presenting that to you, they can supplement that with another form of government identification. And it leaves it open. It does not specify what that document needs to be on the form, but the missing part is the address. So what kind of documents can you supplement for the address? The vagueness of it is government issued. So that could be a vehicle registration. For example, Texas is a little backwards. You have to change your vehicle registration before you get your driver's license. It's bizarre. I have no idea why. It's the only state I've lived in that's done that. Another example would be a lot of utilities are city government owned or even state government owned. So if your utility company is city or state government ran, so City of Houston, if they have a utility, I don't live in Houston, but just as an example, or City of whatever, if they provide your water, if it is a city utility, the city is a government, that would satisfy the requirement. So if the name on the government utility bill matches the name on the photo ID, and then the address puts them in your state, that checks the boxes. One good reason to allow this is if somebody recently moved to the state, DMV's backed up, they haven't had a chance to get in there, or they may have multiple residences in multiple states. And if they have a home in your state, but they keep their driver's license in another state, well, they have residency in your state, so it's legal for them to buy. And they can use something like a city utility bill or their city tax bill or county tax bill to satisfy the address part of the identification requirement. A lot of people do not fully understand this part of the rules and think that they have to have a state ID. Well, no. Technically, you don't have to have a state ID. I could buy a gun in a state without a state ID using my passport and a city utility bill. That would be perfectly legal. Now, finding a dealer that understands that and is willing to accept that is a little bit more challenging at times, because running the state ID just is a lot easier and it's a lot more defensible than jumping through the hoops of getting the supplemental documentation, getting copies of it to kind of cover our behinds when it comes to that audit time. but that is probably the most complicated part of the paperwork, is that supplemental side. And then 26C, that's where I was talking about the military members. So if somebody, I'll use California because California sucks. If somebody is originally from California and they get moved from the military on permanent change of station orders, PCS orders, they have to be permanent change of station orders, not temporary duty. You have to get a copy of those orders, and you have to include the information from those orders in 26C and put that all in there, and then also keep a copy of those orders with your paperwork, because they're not going to take your word for it. So you're going to want to have that paperwork with there. And then the most complicated part on that, and honestly, again, this is one where there's really minimal guidance, is what the heck do they put in Section B in that circumstance? Now, my compliance officer told me for number 10 on the customer side, which is their address information, to have them kind of two-line it. Put their out-of-state address in one spot, and then put their in-state address, be it their barracks location or whatever address they've gotten in the state that their orders are on, in the second one. And because their PCS orders put them in your state, when you run the background check, you want to put in there that their state of residence is your state, and then you just have everything else on this form to just kind of cover your behind. Now, 26D is another one that is kind of interesting. So that is the exception to the non-immigrant alien prohibition. So if somebody is not here on a permanent status, so if they're not a citizen, they're not a resident alien, they have a non-immigration type visa, like a student perhaps that is here for school. If they want to buy a gun and they do not have citizenship or legal status in the country beyond a temporary card, the only way that they can do that is through an exception. And honestly, the only exception that I'm aware of is like a hunting license. So it is permissible to sell a gun to somebody if they have a hunting license, even if they're not on a residence path and not a legal resident, or even if they're not a citizen. That's the only path that they really have, is if they're going to go hunting and they have a valid hunting license. And you put that information in that section. And then the rest is just kind of our backside paperwork. So 27, the date of the transaction. So this would be the date they fill out the paperwork and you submit it for background. And then the next or state transaction number, this goes into 27B. 27C is what they tell you. So if you're running through the federal thing, you're going to get a proceed, a denied, or a delayed. With the delay, you're going to get a date. And that date is, in the industry, called a Brady date. That's the date for which you can release the firearm, whether you have a proceed on the transaction or not. Some states don't allow that. Those states, to me, should have people vote differently, but it is what it is. If they're delayed, box 27D comes into play, and that's when the status updates. So you have to maintain the paperwork and update it as your status is updated. So if you get an update before you transfer the gun, 27D, you get that proceed on day 2, you call the customer, hey, you're clear, you can come get the gun. You fill that out in here and you put the date. Same with any other status update. You put that in here to whatever category applies. 27E. Now this is the one that a lot of dealers will take the stance of, I don't want to transfer a gun and then have the person get denied. So somebody that's delayed, they're on an open status and they don't want to transfer the gun because they're afraid of that. Well, what if it comes back denied? That is not your problem legally. Your legal obligation ends when you follow the law on this paper. So 27E, let's say a person delays and you transfer the gun on day 4. They're still in an open status. You have done nothing illegal. And then let's say 2 weeks later, it comes back denied. Your only obligation is to make sure that the federal government has the information on this form. You do not have to contact that customer. You can, you don't have to. You have no obligations. You've done nothing wrong. All you have to do is update your paperwork, make sure that the federal government has the information they need, file your paperwork away. That's it. Now, on that note, somebody in a forum the other day posted something about that happening and local law enforcement coming in and wanting their form. No. This form is a federal form, and cooperation is important, but you have to cooperate in the right manner. So if anybody other than the ATF ever requests a copy of this form, you need to make sure you take a hard stance of, I understand where you're coming from. Unfortunately, I'm federally licensed, and I would like you to reach out to the local ATF office and have them requested from me or get a copy of it from them, because I need to maintain my records for my compliance. And leave it at that. They don't need to see this form. They have no legal right to see this form without a warrant. That's a hard conversation to have face to face with law enforcement, but that's what we have to do. We need to follow the law and protect the rights of us as dealers and our customers as customers, because that denial could be wrong. They've made mistakes. I've had multiple people appeal denials and win because they just messed up on the background check. And to automatically assume that because somebody got denied, that law enforcement needs to find them right away is not the right approach. You followed everything you're supposed to do under federal law. Anything else is between the federal government and the local law enforcement. You do not need to play intermediary in that. Your contact is your federal ATF compliance officer, your IOI. That is it. They have the ability to contact your ATF office. You don't need to play middleman. If your ATF person requests a copy, send them a copy. One thing that my compliance officer told me was it's okay to send it to anybody with a @atf.gov email address. Anybody other than that is a no-go without going through them first. And I had that discussion with my compliance officer because I got a call from somebody that said they were ATF from a different jurisdiction where I had done a gun show. And I just wasn't sure how that worked. So I called my compliance officer and they asked me who it was. And then they told me that line where, as long as they have an @atf.gov, you're fine. It's okay to send it. So that's kind of the premise I've taken. Unless they have ATF in their title, they're not getting a copy of the form from me. So 28 would be an NFA item. So if you have your SOT, if you sell suppressors, SBRs, and the person has gotten cleared and they have their tax stamp, you check box 28, 27, and 27 doesn't even matter if you check 28. So you just got to make sure you're paying attention to what you're doing and know the parts. And then 29. So you still have to fill out 26 no matter what, but then 27, 28, and 29 are where it depends on what you're selling and what you're doing. So in Texas, we're what's called a permit exemption state. So if an individual has a state issued carry permit, you skip 27 and 28 and you go to 29. And you fill out their information about their carry permit, and that is their background check. There's no additional check required. We're gonna touch base on section D really briefly. So we're gonna jump back to 27 and a person delays. And let's say that they have to come back to the store later. And here's the caveat. I have them sign it even if it's same day, if they've left my premises, because it's a recertification. Technically, it says if it's a different day. So if someone delays like actually delays, it's not just researching, waiting for a status. If someone actually delays and then approves later, or you're gonna Brady it out, you're gonna wait the 3 days and let them have it on that date that it says they can have it, they have to sign this form again in Section D, Part 30. And what that does is, and the way I present it to my customers is, hey, a few days have passed, I need you to sign here and date today's date, whatever the new date is, stating that everything that you originally filled out on this form is still true and accurate. So like, you didn't go rob a bank last night or something like that. And I try to lighten it up that way. You read the customer, but that's what that means. That means that nothing has changed. They didn't decide to move. They didn't get kicked out. They didn't get arrested. Whatever the case may be, nothing has changed, and they're still legally allowed to buy a gun. Section E, there is one part in here that is required on every form, and that's Part 33. So you have to have your license information and premise information in there. Box 32, you can put whatever you want in there. When I'm at gun shows, I'll usually put their phone number in there. Because if they go walk around while it's researching, or if I've got 5 or 6 lined up that I have to run backgrounds on, when I get to them, I will call them when their status comes back. But they're still on the premises, so they haven't left. I'll also use it for anything odd. If you're dealing with a lot of transactions, or if you have weird stuff, you're gonna have stuff come up and you're gonna forget. So I've used it to reference somebody else that was with them that made a transaction. So I'll be like, came in with person who bought whatever, or came in also with transaction number, whatever, just so that I know. Another thing I'll do is on older forms, or rather on newer forms, if somebody does appeal like a denial and they come in for a new transaction on the same gun, you have to do a new form. So on the new form, I'll put in there the old transaction number and the old form information, like what the date was, what the NICS number was, just so that I can cross-reference the two forms. The last part you fill out here is your certification, and that's you as a dealer saying that everything else on this form that's been filled out is complete and accurate, and you have zero reason to believe that there's anything wrong with this transaction. One of the big things I see on that, more often than I should, is the address information. If you know the person does not live where they put down, you can't sell the gun. If somebody writes in an address and they give you their driver's license and you're like, hey, it doesn't match, what's the deal? And they're like, oh, well, I moved, I'll stop. So you can't certify the form at that point in time because you haven't gotten the appropriate checks. And I've seen dealers take that form, tear it up, set it aside, whatever, and give them a new form and say, just put the address that's on your license. That's not legal. You gotta be above board, especially in the current market, in the current economy, and the current focus on compliance from the ATF. I've seen so many small gun shops start to close up just because of the bureaucracy. It's really not too hard to fill out this form, but you gotta stay true to morals and ethics. And no matter how much you agree or disagree with this form, the premise of this form, if you falsify this, it's a felony. And I don't know about you, but I don't want my life wrecked to sell one gun that I might make 15 or 20% margin on. It's not worth it to me. So I don't play those games. If they want to go home, update their address and come back, I'll take a deposit on the gun and let them go do that. And then they'll bring back the appropriate documentation. If their vehicle registration's in their car, okay, go out to your car and bring me your vehicle registration. We'll use that as a supplemental documentation. And you just gotta hold firm on those lines to protect yourself as a dealer. Again, this is a federal form. If you lie on this, if you falsify this, you're gonna get in a jam and you can wind up in jail. Let's talk about corrections, because I haven't touched on that. If in Section B, or even you, if you make a mistake, it's okay to make mistakes on this form. How you fix them is what matters. A single line, initial, and date for any correction. One of the most common ones I'll see is like people on place of birth they just don't read. They read too fast. I don't know, but they'll mess it up in there. Or county, parish, and borough. I've seen people write USA in there because they read county as country, and they just get in a hurry. Single line, initial date, write in the correct answer. Single line, initial date, write in the correct answer. Anything on this form can be corrected as long as it's corrected in that manner. So if you're filling out the information and you transpose something on the identification, you get in a hurry and you write real quick and then you realize, oh crap, I skipped a number. Single line, initial date, write in the new number or the correct number. It's okay to make mistakes. It's not okay to falsify your paperwork, but you want to correct those mistakes when they come up. That is really all I have on like the dealer side. If you have any specific questions or if you ran into anything weird, just let me know and I'll try to answer those questions in the comments. Keep dealing, don't let them win.